Hi there, hope you're all doing well. This week I grabbed the Wood Elf Monk for Age of Fantasy quest. I wanted to put a little bit extra effort into this one as I want to enter the OPR painting competition, so it does take a bit longer than my normal videos, but not as much longer as I thought it would luckily. Starting off, I primed her black and used night blue for the base coat on her leggings and the greaves. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. You could also join Discord using the link in the description, where you can share anything you have been hobbying on, or just hang out and chat. I hope you enjoyed the video and find it useful. Getting the mid-tone in now, I mixed in a little bit of Witching Hour blue and brought up all of the areas facing upwards towards the light. To finish off the highlights on the leggings and getting the remaining clothing base coated now, I went with pure Witching Hour blue, giving the brighter clothing a couple of coats to fully cover and get that smooth base coat. Leaving the darker blue where it is, I started pushing up the mid-tone on the lighter parts with Relic blue, covering a good chunk again, just leaving that Witching Hour blue in the shadowed parts. For the first highlight, I mixed some Seafarer's blue in and brought up the parts in the light, creating a small scratchy gradient towards the mid-tone. Finishing off the gradient and the blues, I used pure Seafarer's blue just in the center of the previous highlights and a scratchy highlight across the tops of the folds. Before I get the trim started, I wanted to get the skin done. To base coat the skin, I started with Druid flesh. This is then followed up by Paladin flesh, bringing up the areas facing up towards the light. The last step on the skin is some barred skin thinned down to push the sharper features up on the face and the tops of the arms and the feet. With the skin all finished, I can move on to the trim and the wrappings, which takes a very long time. I used pale grey as the base coat, so it takes several coats to fully cover on the black. While I have this out, I also added in the eyes at this point. I could have gone brighter with one of the highlight colours, but I think eyes look a little bit weird if you do them too bright. After these several layers are dry, I moved on to adding some highlights using silver grey. For the trim, I tried to place the highlights in line with the highlights on the blue just to keep them consistent. On the wrappings, I went across all of the parts facing upwards, but I leave the darker tone between the wraps for that little bit of extra depth. For the final step, I used white, so I don't go over the top with this one. If I use too much of this, everything's going to start looking chalky, even though the AK white is pretty good at not doing that. On the trim, I go across the edges and the very centers of where I placed the highlights already. For the wrappings, I went across the edges only, leaving the centers of them silver grey. All of the remaining parts now get base coated using charred brown. This includes the base and the succulents on the base, even though they're going to be green later on. Starting with the ropes, I mixed some plague brown in and began bringing up these sculpted strands, just leaving that charred brown in the deeper recesses. The ropes are then finished off with some pure plague brown, just across the tops of these strands facing towards the top of the mini. Now that I've done her hairband, I can get the mid-tone on the hair done by mixing a little sandstone into that charred brown. Just like with the rope, I bring up all of these sculpted strands and leave the darker tone in the recesses between them. Since I had this colour mixed, I also used it to bring up the leather, not aiming for full coverage. I want to get a bit of texture in there and leave that darker brown coming through in random places. The tops of these strands and the edges of the leather are then finished off with pure sandstone, thinned down a little bit extra as I don't want it to be too bright. Now onto the base, I mixed in some barbarian brawn into that charred brown, went over all of the rocks, and some of the tops of the texture base just for a little bit of extra variation. I don't think it makes too much difference, but adding extra variation into a texture like this is very rarely going to be a bad thing. I do this with a couple of mixes, adding some more barbarian brawn in and focusing more towards the edges of the rocks as I go up. I then go for pure barbarian brawn across the edges of the rocks only, just to make them a little bit more worn down. The next step is something I haven't tried before. I heavily thinned down some rust orange to the point it's almost splitting on my palette. I then went over the majority of the base again except for the tops of the rocks. The plan is to tint the ground with an orange hue, but not push the colour too far in that direction. The orange was very thin, so while I waited for that to dry, I grabbed some smoke grey wash and went over the wrappings, just to darken down those recesses slightly and help add that separation into the wraps. The orange is nearly dry, so I can move back to the base with olive green to start these succulents off. I do my best to get the underside of these, but I don't really see the point in pushing too far and getting green on the dirt. You can't really tell anyway unless you hold them in the upside down. While they are still wet, I use septic green to wet blend towards the edges, just giving a basic highlight and a bit more depth into them. To darken down the recesses on the base, I gave it a quick wash of archaic sepia wash. The wash does darken the orange on the base a little bit too much to that point that it can barely be seen. So once the wash was dried, I added another layer of thinned down rust orange, targeting this more towards the rocks and the deeper recesses where the dust would build up. And that will be it for the Wood Elf Monk. I really like how she came out. It's always nice to see a wood elf outside of a green forest that they're traditionally portrayed in, and she pretty much couldn't be further from the actual forest green wood elves. She's wearing water tribe clothing and is in a desert environment. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. You'll also join Discord using the link in the description, where you can share anything you have been hobbying on, or just hang out and chat. For those of you who want to pick up some painting supplies, there are a couple of affiliate links in the description below. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more content. Most importantly though, be kind to each other.